Hey guys, today I'm here with the SuperLift 2.5-inch suspension lift kit with Superide Shocks fitting all 2007 to 2018 JK Wranglers. So adding a lift to your Wrangler can add a number of different benefits, including performance and aesthetics. So this option by SuperLift is going to do just that. This is going to be for the JK owners who are looking for a kit that includes everything that you need to get that extra height on their Wrangler at a very affordable price. So this is going to do a great job at opening up a lot of room in that wheel well for a larger wheel and tire, which I'll get to tire sizes in just a minute, but it's also going to open up a lot of room for better articulation on lighter trails. Now it's also going to level out the rake in your hood that comes from the factory and give your Jeep a more aggressive stance, while also doing a great job at creating a little bit of extra performance on your Wrangler. Now I would recommend this to somebody who is looking for a mild lift, considering this is a 2.5-inch lift that's usually doing some daily driving and any lighter trail riding. So these are going to come with a hydraulic shock that is going to be perfect for that daily driver, giving you a very comfortable feel and a very comfortable ride in your Wrangler, similar to the factory, but that added height is also going to give you that added performance for any of those lighter trails. So because this does come with hydraulic shocks, this is going to be more cost effective than some other options that will be more for higher performance and some heavier trail riding. So like I said, this is perfect for that JK owner who's looking for a kit that's very comfortable on the road for daily driving, but also is going to add that extra performance. So as far as wheel and tire sizes go, this kit is going to allow a 35-inch tire. Now that's going to fill out the wheel well very nicely and still leave you some room for articulation. It's not going to stuff the wheel well, and it still is going to allow you that performance on any of those lighter trails. Now a 33 might look a little small, however, it's still going to allow a lot of room in that wheel well, and if you're comfortable with the 33, it will still look nice matched up with this lift kit. So as far as 37s go, you may be able to mount those up. However, you may have rubbing from wheel lock to wheel lock, and the bump stops are not going to be able to accommodate for that very large tire. So if you do hit a bump and you're not sitting on flat ground, you may have some tire to fender contact. So overall, I would recommend a 35-inch tire with this lift kit. So like I mentioned before, this is going to be a pretty affordable lift kit at roughly $450, and I think for what this lift comes with, that it fits that price perfectly. Now you are getting those hydraulic shocks, which are going to be on the more cost-effective side. Like I mentioned before, when you start to take a look at other lift kits that usually incorporate nitrogen charged shock or high performance shocks, they are going to go a bit up in price, but they also are usually going to include a lot more components when it comes to the pricier lift kits. So then on the other hand, you may have options that are less expensive than this option that are going to come with less components. So they may come with spacers instead of springs, or they may not come with shocks at all. So for $450, I personally think that that is at a really good price point for what this lift comes with, and it's going to be perfect for that Jeep owner who is just looking for a little bit of extra height and a very comfortable ride and is not really worried about all of that extra performance. So install is going to be a 3 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter. If you are going to tackle this in your driveway, you will need a number of basic hand tools, some specialty tools, and you're probably going to need 5 hours worth of time to get the job done. So speaking of the install, let's jump into that now. The tools that I used for my install were a tape measure, a pair of safety glasses, a cutoff wheel, a dead blow, a trim removal tool, impact wrenches, pneumatic and electric, a pair of channel locks, a 19mm, 18mm, 17mm, and 16mm open-ended wrench, 16mm and 9/16 inch ratcheting wrench, an 11mm open-ended wrench, flathead screwdriver, a marker, a body saw, 3/8 inch drive and 1/4 inch drive ratchet, a 21mm, 19mm, and 18mm deep impact socket, a 19mm, 18mm, and 16mm swivel socket, a drill, a 7/32 inch drill bit, a center punch, an 11mm shallow socket, a 10mm, 3/8 inch, 10mm, and 11mm deep socket, a 5-inch extension, and a 15-inch extension. So to kick off this lift kit, you want to make sure that you have your Jeep up in the air. Now we are going to be starting in the front, so if you are on a jack and jack stands, you're going to want to jack up the front and chock the rear wheels. Now next you want to make sure that the axle is supported. Now we're up on a lift, so I'm supporting it with a couple of pole jacks, but if you're on the ground with the jack and jack stands, you want to make sure that it is supported with a couple of jack stands. So next we can go ahead and take off the bottom bolt of our sway bar end links. I'm going to be using an 18mm socket and wrench to take those off. for this side, I am going to use a swivel socket on the bolt head just because there is not a lot of room. I turned the wheel or the axle all the way passenger side, and that should give us enough room to squeeze the impact in. So our next step is to take out the axle side track bar bolt. This is going to allow our axle to drop. So I'm going to be using a 21mm deep socket just to clear our drag link here with the impact wrench. As soon as that's removed, you want to make sure that you grab the flag nut on the other side. We'll connect this after we're done on the ground, and then we can move to lowering our axle. So what we're going to do next is remove our lower shock bolt. I'm going to use an 18mm wrench and socket to remove that bolt. So in order to get the bolt out, it may be stuck at first. You can tinker around with the axle height, kind of put a little bit of pressure on it. And it should come loose. It looks like there's a little bit of corrosion on it, so I'm gonna hit it out with a mallet. So what we can do now is disconnect the shock completely up at the top. Now there is a nut on a stud up here. I recommend soaking it in a penetrating oil because these can get very rusty. Now I'm also going to use an open-ended 16mm wrench to hold the shock body still with this captured nut here. And then I can take a 16mm ratcheting wrench and take the nut off the top here. So what I'm actually going to do is wedge this 16mm wrench up against the shock tower. So unfortunately, while I was trying to ratchet the nut off of the stud on the top of our shock, the stud broke. Now this is a very common problem for JK shocks. They do rust a lot up here just because it is more of an enclosed area. And if it does break, all you have to do is just completely take it out because we are getting all of the replacement pieces in order to put in our new shock. So this is not a problem. So we are just going to go ahead and take out the rest of our shock, making sure that we grab the rest of our hardware that's on top of that shock tower. So I'm just lowering the axle a little bit, give myself a little bit of wiggle room, and then it should wiggle right out. You can tell right there where it broke, and then you'll be able to grab the cup washer and the bushing from the top, and those are going to be replaced as well, so we can move over to the other side. So on the passenger side, for the upper shock tower, there is a battery tray here that's not going to allow you to get a wrench or really anything in there. So what I did was took a body saw and kind of trimmed that off. This has no structural integrity on the bottom here, so it does not matter if you trim that off. And then we'll have access to that top nut, which makes it easy in the future if you ever want to replace your shocks. So what I'm going to do is take that 16mm ratcheting wrench and go ahead and remove that. So on this side, because there's not a lot of room, I am using the open-ended part of the wrench. I can't really fit the ratcheting wrench in here, so it might take a little bit longer. So what we're going to do next is remove our brake line bracket from our frame just to make sure that this has a little bit of slack when we lower our axle. I'm using a 10mm deep socket, or you could just use a 10mm socket to remove that bracket. On the driver's side too, you're going to have your breather tube. What we can do is take a trim removal tool and get that little clip out of our ABS line, and then this will have a little bit more slack to it. So what we can do next is remove our lower brake line bracket. Now we are going to be cutting this off in just a minute. However, I want to make sure that this is out of the lower spring perch while we take out our springs. So I'm using a 10mm deep socket. And after that bolt is removed, what we can do is pull out the front and wiggle out the bracket. So it just got stuck. What I'm going to do is just pry it off. So what we can do now is start to lower down our axle so we can take out our springs. We want to try to keep the axle as even as possible. Once we drop it down to its lowest point, what we can do is just move our sway bar out of the way. We'll be putting new brackets on here. So before we go ahead and install our new suspension system, I did want to tell you guys a little bit more about the major components, especially in comparison to the factory setup and what you're going to get out of this new system that you're not really getting with the old system. So right off the bat, this is going to be a huge opportunity to replace any worn or damaged parts from your factory setup. As you can tell, we have a lot of wear and tear on the bushings and the shock body, as well as the springs. You can tell that there's a lot of rust, and they've been going for a very long time. And this is not only going to serve as a big upgrade, especially in performance, but it's also going to do a great job at some restoration. Now, so starting off with the shocks, there are two big schools of thought when it comes to shocks. You have a nitrogen charged shock and a hydraulic shock. So starting off with the nitrogen, that's usually going to be for somebody who's looking for a little bit more performance than the factory setup or the hydraulic shock. So that's going to be for somebody who's working the shock really hard and looking to do bumps at fast speeds, just because it is going to reduce shock fade or cavitation, which is foaming forming inside the shock body over time. Now there's also a hydraulic shock, which is very similar to the factory, and that's going to give you a very fluid and comfortable ride, and perfect for somebody who's looking to mainly stay on the street as a daily driver, but also do some lighter trails. And that's exactly the setup that we have here with these Superide shocks. So that's exactly what we're getting out of this Superide shock. It's going to be a velocity valved hydraulic shock. It is going to be a big upgrade from the factory shock. It is going to last a little bit longer, but you're still going to get that fluid and comfortable feel out of this setup over the factory, with also a step up in performance. So enough about these two side by side. Let's go ahead and install our new suspension system. So our next step is going to be to install our springs. I have someone holding down the axle just because it didn't drop far enough, but once you have it seated into place, we can do the same thing for the other side. So what we're going to do now is remove our brake line bracket. Now what I'm going to do is mount this up to its stock location, but leave this tab out. So I want to leave this area open because we are going to make a notch in it. And we're also going to take off our ABS line. So what I'm going to do is take our 10mm bolt and mount that back up. You could also grab a pair of vice grips and clamp it to one of these mounts. I just find it easiest to reuse the bolt. You just want to make sure this is stationary. What I'm going to do now is grab a trim removal tool, and we're going to pop out these clips in that bracket and get our ABS line out of the way. All right, then we can just pop them out from our soft line. And what I do is just tuck it up in the spring. We're gonna grab it in just a second, but I wanna make sure that it's out of the way of our cutoff wheel. And then what we're gonna do now is take a cutoff wheel and make a small notch, making sure not to touch the brake line. If you do happen to mess up this soft line, you will have to replace it. So you wanna make sure that you're staying away from the soft line, you're preserving that, and we're only just removing this bracket here. What we can do is wiggle that soft line out and then completely remove this bracket with that 10mm socket like we did before. So after we have our old bracket off, what we can do is install our new bracket. Now you are going to have a passenger and driver side, making sure that the numbers or the part number are facing the inside. So I'm going to hook the tab on just like our old bracket and pop that one into place. Now you are going to get new hardware. I'm going to take the bolt flat washer and nylon lock nut that they provide and bolt that into the factory location. Then we can tighten that down with an 11mm socket and an 11mm wrench. Now what we can do is pop this ABS line back into place on our soft line. And these two clips are going to pop through the two tabs on that bracket. Now this one broke off, so we won't be able to install that one. What we can do with our soft line is grab this clamp and the same hardware that we secured the bracket with and install that through the hole in the middle. Then we can tighten that down with the same 11mm socket and wrench. Once that clamp is tightened down, then we can do the same thing on the other side. So before we can install our shocks on our Wrangler, we do have to prep them and press in the bushings and the metal sleeves. I already took care of the front ones, but I did want to do the rear shocks at the same time and show you how to do this. So we're gonna take the hourglass poly bushing and press that in. You are gonna need a vice grip in order to do this. You should be able to do this without a vice grip, but a vice grip makes it 10 times easier. So we're gonna press in the hourglass poly bushing, make sure that it's centered in the shock and try not to tear the bushing. And then once that's in place, we can take our metal sleeve, put it into place halfway, put it in our vise and press it into place. And then we'll be ready to install these on our Wrangler. So now we can install our front shock, making sure that we have our cup washer on the bottom and then our bushing, and then it's gonna be the opposite on the other side, and then we can attach our nut. So we're gonna send that on through where our factory one was, making sure that our bushing and our cup washer are on top and the stud is going through them. Then we can take our new provided nut and thread that onto the top there. And then once that's threaded on, what we can do is take a 9/16 inch wrench and tighten that down. So now we can attach the bottom. You should be able to move the shock body around freely. We're gonna reuse our factory bolt and tighten that down with the same 18mm socket and wrench. So what we can do while we're here is just resecure this brake line bracket using the factory bolt and tightening it down with a 10mm socket. Then we can do the same thing on the other side. So our next step is to install our sway bar end link front brackets. So you are gonna have a driver and a passenger side. There is going to be a cutout for the axle. So we are going to put that into place, and this is basically just gonna move your sway bar links up instead of extending your sway bar links. So we're gonna take the provided bolt, flat washer, and nylon lock nut and secure that down to the factory bracket. After that's on there, we can take the factory bolt for our sway bar end link and mount that up to the inside of the bracket. Now you want to make sure that this lip is facing the inside. And then before we tighten these down, just to give some adjustability to our sway bar, we can do the same thing on the other side. So what we can do now is tighten both of those down. You're gonna be using a 19mm wrench and socket. I'm gonna be using a swivel socket on this bottom bolt. And then to tighten the top, we're gonna be using that same 18mm swivel and 18mm wrench that we used before. Then we can repeat that process on the other side. So after those are buttoned up, what we can do is move to the back. So So all we have left to do in the front is just reconnect our track bar, but we do have to do that on the ground. So our next step is to move to the back, support our axle, and then we can take off our rear shocks. So I'm gonna be using an 18mm deep socket and an 18mm wrench, and we can remove this bottom bolt. So then we can repeat that process on the other side. You may have to tinker with the height of the axle in order to get that bolt out. So our next step is to remove the top 2 bolts that are holding in the top of the shock in the bar pin. So I'm going to use a 16mm swivel socket and a 15-inch extension in my impact wrench to remove those. So our next step is to remove our sway bar end links. Now we only have to remove the bottom bolt. So I'm gonna be using an 18mm socket and wrench in order to get that bottom bolt off. So what we have to do next is take out the axle side track bar bracket. This is gonna allow our axle to drop. So I'm using a 21mm socket, just like we did in the front. Make sure you grab that flag nut, and then what we can do now is focus on our brake lines. So our next step is to remove our brake line bracket from our frame. Just like the front, I'm gonna use a 10mm socket, and we're gonna unhook that from the frame. So just like the hard line, we do need to take off the ABS line. I'm gonna use a trim removal tool and remove these clips from the frame. That's just gonna give us some extra slack, so when we drop our axle, we're not maxing out our brake line. So our next step is to drop the axle. I would recommend just pulling off this breather hose. All you have to do is pull it off the axle here, and then we can drop our axle down. So I would still recommend to keep an eye on your brake lines. After you've disconnected most of the clips and the brackets, they should be pretty good, but you still want to make sure you're keeping an eye on those. And then once the axle is dropped pretty far down, we will be able to take out our springs. So what we can do is kind of pull down on the axle. You might not need to, but the spring should pop right out. So after we have our old springs out, what we can do is grab our new spring and set it into place. I recommend to have somebody hold down on the axle just because these are a little bit taller. Now you can loosen up the control arms, but you don't necessarily have to. So on to the other side. So what we can do now is start to raise this back up. It's not gonna sit exact because the axle is rolled back. So if it's rubbing on your e-brake line, that is okay while the axle is dropped. You just wanna make sure that it's positioned correctly in the upper isolator where your factory one was, and we can start to lift it up. So when you start to lift it up, it's gonna roll back into place and it's gonna clear the brake line bracket. So our next step is going to be to straighten out our brake line. We do have to put in a self-tapping screw here to hold it so we can drop this down and give it a little bit of slack with our new lift height. So I'm gonna take a trim removal tool and pop out this clip. So we won't actually need this anymore, so we can take this off, but we will have to straighten out this brake line. We're just gonna straighten out that kink there. So after the brake line is most of the way straightened out, it's going to allow it to drop. So we do need to get this bracket out of the way, or this little clip here. I'm just gonna use a flathead screwdriver to pry it off, and we can take that off of the hard line. So what we can do now is measure over 3 3/8 inches from this bump stop and drill a hole. Then we can grab a 7/32 inch drill and drill a hole for our self-tapping screw. So our next step is to attach our clamp as well as our self-tapping screw. So I'm going to hook the clamp on. line it up where we just drilled. Take our self-tapping screw and a 3/8 inch drill bit and attach that clamp. So what we can do now is attach our brake line drop bracket. I am using the driver's side. They are going to be side specific. You want to make sure that it clips into the frame like the factory brake line bracket. And I'm just going to loosely attach that while I attach the bottom. So this is going to sit inside this bracket here, and we'll be able to take our provided hardware and attach that through our drop bracket. So then we can tighten up our top bolt from the factory with a 10mm socket. And then the bottom one with an 11mm socket and a 11mm wrench. Then we can do the same thing on the other side. So what we can do is remove this clip with the trim removal tool, and we'll be just throwing this in the trash because we won't be reusing this. After that's off, we could take a flathead screwdriver and pry open the clip, take that off the brake line. And then what we're gonna have to do with the brake line is straighten it out so we can gain a little bit of extra length. So after it's straightened out, what we need to do is measure over 3 3/8 inches and 1 3/8 inches down, and then we'll be able to drill a hole and attach a self-tapping screw. So we wanna measure over from this hole on the bump stop mount. So what I'm gonna do is just mark where we need to drill with a marker. Then we can grab a 7/32 inch drill and drill a hole for our self-tapping screw. So what we can do next is grab our clamp, hook that around, pinch it down. Then we can grab our self-tapping screw and a 3/8 inch socket and tighten that down to the frame. So this should still be able to move within the bracket if you need to move it over, but now we can attach our brake line drop bracket. So what we can do now is grab our brake line drop bracket. This is going to be side specific. We can take our factory bolt and put that into the retainer clip. Now I'm not going to tighten it down just yet. I want to make sure we can grab our brake line and line it up. We can grab our provided bolt, flat washer, and nylon lock nut. So then we can tighten that down with an 11mm socket and wrench. And last but not least, we can tighten down that top bolt with a 10mm socket. So after we have our brake line situated, what we're going to do next is reattach our sway bar end links. Now the rear ones don't come with brackets because they are longer, so we're going to take the factory bolt and just reattach this at the bottom. If you need to pull the sway bar down, you can do that, and then we can tighten it up with an 18mm wrench and socket. You can do the same thing on the other side. So now we can install our shock starting with the top. What I like to do is thread in the harder to reach bolt, the one towards the frame, and then we can hook the bar pin on and attach the other side. So once the bar pin's captured, we can take that 15-inch extension for this. So because these are hydraulic shocks, you will be able to move them pretty freely, and then we can install our factory bolt and tighten it down with an 18mm wrench and socket. So after you get the tires on and the Jeep is down on the ground, you want to wiggle the back end of your Wrangler and you will be able to get the track bar bolt in place. Then you want to attach the flag nut, and then we can tighten it down with a 21mm socket. So to line up your front track bar, I would recommend grabbing your friend and having them turn the steering wheel back and forth, and you'll be able to get that bolt through. Then we can take a 21mm socket and tighten it down. So that's gonna wrap it up for my review and install. Make sure you like and subscribe, and for more videos and products like this, always keep it right here at ExtremeTerrain.com.